YouTube, what is going on, guys? In today's video, we're going to be discussing a topic that a lot of you have requested, and that is how to expose and color for the GH5 V-LOG, and more specifically, how to expose and color for the GHAlex LUT. Go ahead and check out some of this footage right here. Now real quick, guys, now that we've seen this test footage, I do want to say that I do have two videos that are already out. One of the videos is showing how you can get perfect exposure and color in every video no matter what camera you're using, as well as also discussing what the GHAlex LUT is, what it tries to look like or emulate, which is the Arri Alexa. And you can check out both videos by clicking the I up in the right hand corner and checking out both of those videos if you want to refresh yourself before you continue on with this video. So guys, this video will be broken up into three sections, and that is going to be the pre-production, the production, and the post-production. And I will leave time codes down below so you can hop back and forth between these three steps. With that being said, let's go ahead and hop into the first aspect, which is going to be the pre-production and getting your camera set up ready to shoot in V-LOG, as well as utilizing it for the GHAlex LUT later on in post-production. Now guys, the GHAlex LUT does come with a very descriptive PDF that does break down from start to finish how to best utilize your camera and the GH5 to get the best quality out of the GHAlex LUT that is provided. So let's go ahead and hop into the pre-production aspect when it comes to the GHAlex LUT. Now when it comes to pre-production, you want to make sure you have your GH5 set up with two zebras. One zebra is going to be covering the highlights, and the second zebra is going to be covering your mids or your skin tones more specifically. Now when you go into your GH5 and go to your zebra options, you can set two zebras set up, and like I said, I have the first zebra set up for my highlights. So if you go into your GH5, go to zebra and set your zebra 1. I set that at 80%, and that is going to cover the highlights and make sure that nothing is overexposed or blown out when it comes to utilizing this for the GHAlex LUT. And then I go down and go to zebra 2, and I set my zebra 2 at 55%, and that is going to cover the mids, or more specifically your skin tones, so you can toggle back and forth between the zebra 1 and zebra 2 when it comes to exposing for the highlights or exposing for the skin tones. Now after shooting on the GH5 in V-LOG for several years, I found that it doesn't matter if you're planning to use the GHAlex LUT or you're going to do a V-LOG to Rec 709 conversion. The best settings that I did find to be was that in the blacks and the shadows, I never tried to take it below the 10% line. For the mids and the skin tones, I tried to keep it between 50 to 60% on the waveform line. And then for the highlights, I usually try to never take it past the 80% realm. Sometimes I do have to push it to 90%, but anything past that, you're gonna start to get overblown and overexposed images. So try to keep it between that 80 to 90% realm. If you can, try to keep it at that 80% for the highlights. And these are the best settings that I did find when shooting in V-LOG, whether it be for the GHAlex LUT or even the Rec 709 conversion. Now these percentages when it comes to the blacks and the shadows, the mids, skin tones, and the highlights will vary when you're shooting in another custom profile such as Cine D, HLG, or other profiles that are within the GH5. The settings that I did just say that work best are for V-LOG, but again, these will differ and vary when it comes to shooting in other custom profiles. So just keep that in mind when you're shooting in your GH5. So the great thing about this GHAlex LUT 2 is that it does come with a VLT for reference monitoring, and you can put this on your memory card. And then when you're actually using your GH5, you can set a custom button on your GH5 to toggle back and forth for live viewing of the LUT for the GHAlex LUT, just like you would be able to view the Rec 709 conversion. So while you're on set shooting, you could see what your exposed shot will look like when you go to take it into post-production and add that actual LUT, whether it be the Rec 709 conversion LUT or the GHAlex LUT. So again, you can add that GHAlex VLT external monitoring to your memory card, and then all you have to do is actually create a quick button on your GH5 to be able to toggle back between V-LOG and the reference monitor for the GHAlex LUT. So when you're planning to shoot in V-LOG and to use the GHAlex LUT in post, for anything outside of slow motion, you want to shoot in the all-in option. You want to shoot in the all-in option, which is going to be 10-bit, specifically the 400 megabytes all-in 10-bit option. It doesn't matter if it's the Cinema 4K, which is the 4096 by 2160, or the ultra high definition, which is going to be the 3840 by 2160. You want to choose the all-in option when you're planning on shooting in V-Log and applying the GHAlex LUT in post. Now, if you're planning to shoot in slow motion and you still want to utilize the V-Log, I would say you still need to use the all-in option, which is going to be the 1920 by 1080 shot in 60 frames per second, which you can then convert to 24 frames per second in post-production to be able to slow down that clip. But again, if you're planning on shooting in V-Log and you want to utilize the slow motion in V-Log, the best option is going to be shooting in the 1920 by 1080, 60 frames per second, and then in post-production, converting that clip to 24 frames per second to be able to actually apply the slow motion effect. Now, if you're like me and you like shooting in a higher frame rate than 60 frames per second for your slow motion on your GH5, personally, I like shooting in either 72 frames per second or 96 frames per second. Anything higher than that is usually too slow motion for me for the kind of content that I shoot. You're gonna wanna go and select the last option on your GH5, which is the 1920 by 1080 8-bit option, which will allow you the variable frame rates to go past the 60 frames per second. I believe it goes from 72 all the way up to 180 frames per second, if I'm not mistaken. So what's happening is you're going from 10-bit to 8-bit. So when you're using the GHAlex LUT, you're gonna wanna switch this from the V-Log to the Cine D when you're shooting in anything 8-bit. And that is because that is going to prevent the macro blocking and the Kodak banning that comes with trying to shoot V-Log in 8-bit when you go into post-production and trying to color and do with the footage in 8-bit what would be better to use in 10-bit. So if you're shooting in 8-bit, make sure you use Cine D, especially if you're wanting to use the GHAlex LUT. We will cover this in the post-production because the GHAlex LUT does actually have a Cine D to V-Log conversion to then be able to apply the GHAlex LUT. So we will cover that in the post-production. But when you're shooting in 8-bit, just keep this in mind, shoot in Cine D. And when you're shooting in 10-bit and all in, make sure you shoot it in V-Log for the GHAlex LUT. Now, once you figured out what you're shooting, whether that be non-slow motion shots or the slow motion shots, and you've got your camera set up on what you're gonna be shooting, you're gonna want to white balance the camera before you go ahead and start recording. So you can either do that by having a white card on set or even having a white piece of paper. And what you want to do is just put that white card up to the camera and then go ahead and click the button to take a picture of it. And then the GH5 will automatically put the white balance on your camera. Now you do that by selecting the custom white balance. You don't do auto white balance or cloudy or any other option that they're giving you that just basically calibrates a certain Kelvin to be able to put into the camera for the set that you're on. What you want to do is you want to go to either custom 1, custom 2, or custom 3, and then go to set white balance and take a picture of that white card, white piece of paper, whatever white that you have on set to be able to do the custom white balance. Now, after you've selected your shooting method and the white balance, what you're gonna now do is you're gonna set your exposure. And the easiest way that I do this is if I'm shooting talent or I'm shooting an actual subject, even say for instance, this talking head where I do my interviews, you're gonna wanna expose on the Zebra 2 that we talked about, which is set at the 55%. And that's gonna be for the mids and the skin tones. So if you're shooting a subject or a person or just something that has to do with skin tones, I have it set for the Zebra 2, which is the 55%. And if you're shooting outside of a subject, I set that for the 80%, and that is going to prevent from the clipping of the highlights. And I also, when looking at the waveform, make sure whether I'm shooting a subject or I'm shooting a location or a scene without actual talent in it, I will make sure that the blacks and the shadows don't go below that 10% mark like we talked about. Now, obviously, I do know that there is certain scenarios like I've been in, as I'm sure you all have been in as well, where there's uncontrolled lighting environments and your waveform and your exposure is going to vary and differ, especially as the subject moves around or you move the camera around to different lighting areas. So you just want to try to reference back to that waveform monitor on your GH5 and try to remember, like we talked about, keeping the blacks and the shadows above the 10% line, keeping the mids and the skin tones between that 50 to 60% line, and keeping your highlights below the 80% line so it prevents from clipping and overblowing your shot in your highlights. So guys, another cool thing that they have have added to the GHAlex LUT folder, and the new update is they provided an exposure compensation folder that is allowing you headroom if you either underexposed or overexposed a certain shot. So what's within that folder is increments of 0.33 all the way up to +1 or -1. I believe it may be a little bit higher, but it's going in 0.33 increments, just like a GH5 would. So it's giving you that extra headroom for either underexposed or overexposed shots to be able to bring it back into that waveform distance that we talked about, going from the 10% to the 80%. So if you get into post-production and you realize certain shots have either been underexposed or overexposed, this LUT does provide exposure compensations from the -1 to the +1, depending on, again, if you overexposed or underexposed. But we will be covering that in the post-production process. So moving into the last step of this process is going to be the post-production process, where we bring in our clips and we add the GHAlex LUT based off of the PDF that they have provided. So for this video, I'm going to be showing it inside of DaVinci Resolve, but if you don't use DaVinci Resolve and you're using another editing software such as Premiere Pro or Final Cut X, they do actually have the steps on how to bring in the clips and apply the GHAlex LUT in those other editing softwares. But for this video, we're going to be covering it inside of DaVinci Resolve because personally, that is the best coloring software to be using for your editing and your video needs. All right, guys, so now that we're inside of DaVinci Resolve, I'm going to be going through 2 examples. And the first example is going to be from a music video shoot that I had with the artist Jab, and this was for a music video called On That. It's actually on my YouTube channel. I will leave a link down below where you can go view that music video, but this is going to be the first example, and this was during a performance scene that was shot in V-LOG, 10-bit all-in option. And then the second example we're going to be looking at is a example that was shot in the 8-bit slow motion 1920 by 1080 Cine D setting, and this is going to be showing taking the Cine D, transforming it and putting it into a V-LOG codec, and then from there applying the GHAlex LUT and everything else needed to apply the GHAlex LUT in a correct way. So let's go ahead and hop into the first example, and that's going to be with the artist during the music video. So now that we've cleared everything out, the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new serial node, and you're going to do that by selecting option S. I'm going to go over and right click on the serial node, and I'm going to click node label and label this as the white balance. Usually for white balance, what I do is I come over to the color wheel if I didn't do this on set with a white card, and I try to find a white point in the shot and zoom in on it and use the eyedropper tool in the color wheels and click on the actual white reference that I want to use as the white balance. So I'm going to use that, and from here now we're going to create a new serial node, and we're going to right click and label this main. And this is when we apply one of the GHAlex options between log C, soft, main, or linear. So I'm going to right click, go over to LUTs, 3D LUT, go down to color conversions, go over to 65x, not 33x. Make sure you choose 65x for your editing software that you're doing this in. 33x is mainly used for external reference monitors such as a Small HD or an Atomos on set. So make sure you're doing 65x, and then you'd be able to choose between daylight or tungsten. For this was outside during the daytime, so I'm going to choose daylight. Most of the time I usually use daylight. I've noticed it almost does the same thing as tungsten, so I'm going to choose daylight soft. I'm a fan of that one. And already you can see that it has applied basically a good grade for this image. Let's go ahead and toggle this off and on. Now from here, what we're going to do is we're going to add another serial, and this time we're going to label this post. And this is one of the new features that the updated GHAlex LUT has, and that is going to be the auto black level. So the 2 new things that it has is the auto black level, and it also has the exposure compensation that we talked about. So for the auto black level or post, we're going to right click, we're going to go to LUT, 3D LUT, we're going to go to auto black, and you have an option between 1, 2, 3, or 4. 1 is the lowest that is going to lower the blacks, 4 is the most is going to lower the blacks. So let's go ahead and choose level 1, and make sure that you have your scopes brought up, mainly your waveform. And make sure that you have color selected off. I have my parameters set at low for 45 and high at 780. Let's see how it would look with a lower level than that. This is going to be 2. And you can see it's already going below that line, so I want to put it back at 1. Now the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to add our luminance levels. So we're going to create a new serial node. And from here, what we want to do is create a duplicate node to be able to create a mixer channel. So you want to do Option L, and then come over and click this button right here. Make sure it's toggled on. Right click, do composite mode, and you want to go down to hue, and then you want to create another serial after that, and we'll label this as the color in case you want to do a grade on top of everything that's already been done. So let's go ahead and right click and label this luminance, and let's go to our curves, and make sure when you're doing your luminance curves you just select Y, you don't do R, G, and B. You don't want to mess with the reds, the greens, and the blues. You want to just do the luminance, so make sure Y is only selected. And for this one I actually want to raise the highlights up a little bit. With soft it has a max IRE of 76, but right now before we did this adjustment it was below 640, so I want to bring it up a little bit above the 640 line, give it a little bit of highlight, and right there is about good. And I'm going to come down to the blacks and the shadows area, and I'm going to bring this down just a little bit so it's touching that 40 line, and I'm happy with that. So this is going to be the first example of coloring, and that's going to be everything needed to apply the GHAlex LUT for this. Because I chose the soft option when it comes to the GHAlex LUT is a low saturation, low contrast, washed out look. Think of a film-esque look where it's washed out in the saturation and in the contrast. It's like a moody, faded kind of look. So I don't really want to do a color grade to this. I'm already happy with how it is. Don't fix it if anything's not broken. I'm happy with this look, and I was happy with this look when I did this for the music video, so I don't need to apply a color grade for this. So this is going to be the first example. Let's go ahead and jump over to the second example, which is going to be the Cine D to V-Log and then adding the GHAlex LUT. So guys, this is going to be the second example, and this is going to be taking the Cine D 8-bit 1920 by 1080 option that was shot in a variable frame rate of 72 frames per second, and then conforming this Cine D to a V-Log profile. And then from there we're taking the V-Log profile and adding a GHAlex LUT of our option and going through that whole process again. And with this one now, however, what happened is you have to take the Cine D and put it to V-Log, so we have to have an extra step in this process. So let's go ahead and create a new serial node. Let's go right click, node label. We're going to label this PRE, and what you want to do is right click, come down to your LUTs, go to 3D LUT, and you want to go to your Cine D conversion, and you want to choose Cine D to V-Log PRE, and you want to choose the GHA Cine D to V-Log PRE daylight. We're going to go ahead and click that, and as you can see now, what that has done is that has taken that Cine D profile that usually has a contrast saturation look, more or less a grade already applied to it, kind of like a Rec 709, and it takes it and it puts it back to the V-Log profile of a flat image with very little color, no saturation, noise reduction, etc. Just basically a V-Log profile. So now what we can do from here is we can add a new serial node, and we can go ahead and right click and label this the white balance. Let's go ahead and do all of these steps again real quick. Create a new node, label this main, another node, post for the auto black levels, another node with a node below that, Option L, remember to do that for the channel mixer. Right click on that channel mixer, composite mode, hue. I'm going to right click this and label this luminance. And then we want to do one more node after this, and for this one I did have a skin color correction. So We've already done the pre, which was taking the Cine D2 V-Log, so let's go ahead and do the white balance now. Now for the white balance, I'm gonna do this again by going over to color wheels, zooming in on his shirt, and selecting the eyedropper tool, and clicking on his shirt. Check the vector scope. Okay. In the primary bars, let's see if we can bring that green level to the right, more towards the reds and the magentas. Let's check that out real quick. So I like this better. It's actually taken a little bit of the green out and added a little bit more into the reds. And as you can see, it's actually positioned this whole waveform more into the center of the circle. So we're gonna go ahead and click out of that now that we've got our white balance set. We're gonna go over to main. And again, for this option, I wanted to use the GHAlex LUT soft version. So we're gonna right click it, go to LUTs, 3D LUT. And we're gonna come down to color conversions, remember 65X. And we wanna choose GHAlex Daylight Soft. And already it's looking way better than the original. So now the next option is going and getting our auto black level. And you want to right click, go to 3D LUT, auto black level. Let's bring this down to 2. And now as you can see, the blacks and the shadows are more towards that 40 line. I don't want to go any lower than that, because I can actually fix this in post in the luminance section. See what would happen if we hit 3. That's too crushed to me. So let's bring it back to 2. And now we can go over to our luminance bar. Click luminance, come over to your curves. And again, for this one, I want to bring the highlights down a little bit. And I want to bring my blacks and shadows down just a smidge. It's okay to have a little bit going below that 40 line. You can see that most of it is not. It's just a tiny bit here and there. I think that's actually showing up as either his bag or this bar right here. Actually, this part right here, I think is this bar, and then this part right here is his black bag in the camera possibly. All right, so once we've set that, this could be a final image, depending on what your look is. So this is the after and possible final version, and this is where we started with. Before, after, before, after. Now on this one, what I want to do is I want to check the skin tones and possibly tweak this a little bit. So what I did was I created a new serial node after luminance, and what I'm going to do is create a new power window circle, and I'm going to position this on his face and try to see how the skin tones are doing. Let's go ahead and zoom in on his face, make this smaller, and position it right on his cheek. And then we're gonna go to the magic wand and go to our scopes, and we're going to select the vector scope and maximize this up. And let's see where this line is falling as far as the skin tones. So let's go ahead and remove that skin tone indicator so we can see where the line is. And it's actually directly right on the line, if not just a little bit to the right of it. So I'm actually not going to tweak that at all. It's actually right where I want it to be. I just wanted to check it. So if you do want to check your skin tone and color correction as far as the skin tones, that's how you can do it, by creating a power window. And then when you're done with it, just deselect the circle and deselect the wand. And this is going to be the final outcome for the 8-bit Cine D2 V-Log and then to the GHAlex soft version. And that's going to be everything that you need to do as far as bringing in your footage and adding the GHAlex LUT, whether it be to V-Log 10-bit all-in footage or it is for 8-bit Cine footage that you need to convert to V-Log and then add the GHAlex LUT and post-production processes. So guys, this is going to be how I expose, shoot, and color in post utilizing the GHAlex LUT. As always guys, if you did like this video, please be sure to like, comment, and share this video, as well as smash that subscribe button and click the notification bell to stay up to date with all the new content that I do have coming to this channel. Check you all guys out next video.